Not sure, but I thought maybe I owe you an apology for making you sprint through 11 chapters with me this morning. But the good news is that I can't do that to you tonight because there's only 2 left in the book. But I did want to give you the background to help you see the reason why I had the question that I had. So just a brief recap in case there's some here that weren't here this morning. When I look at these, what we would call, the Faith Hall of Fame or whatever that we have here in Hebrews chapter 11, and I read about Noah, and I mean clearly Noah moved with fear and he prepared an ark and he did everything that God commanded him to do. But I thought, well, God's never going to ask me to build an ark. So just exactly what should I take away from this story? Or like Abraham, God's not going to ask me, to sacrifice my son. So I thought, what am I supposed to take from particularly this chapter? What is the author? What is God trying to get across to me in this chapter? How does it apply to me? How would it apply to you? And especially, how did it apply to those New Testament Christians that came out of Judaism? Because sometimes, if we really whittle it down to what it should have meant to them, it might help us extract some meaning out of it. But we can say it goes without saying, right, that the Spirit surely provided it for good reason. So again, just in a nutshell, just to simply say, well, fear God and keep His commandments. That's what He wants. He just wants obedience. And I thought, well, yes, but maybe that's a little too simplistic for this really elaborate argument that he presented, and I don't want to be left to assume anything, so I was looking closer for details. Have you ever come upon a roadblock in your travels? I drive a lot for work, and I go down the same roads pretty often in the same week. And it was sometime earlier this year, I saw the orange signs, and it was like, it was a roadblock. Well, you can't see down there to know what's going on. You're thinking to yourself, maybe I can risk it. Maybe I can get through there. But I thought, well, I'm pulling a trailer. I won't press my luck. So I turned around and went the other way, and I got a little further down the road parallel to it, and the bridge was out. So, you have to realize sometimes that roadblock is there. The point is you can't see what's ahead. And if the bridge is out, you'd be in trouble if you proceeded. I thought, there's a lot of mathematical minds in here, and I thought maybe I'd go online somewhere and find a real perplexing equation and put it on the slide up here and just ask you if you've ever got stumbled by like a big equation. And I thought, no, because somebody will know the answer to the equation. So for you individually, if you've got that kind of mind, think for a minute about one of those challenging problems. You just couldn't figure out what you were supposed to do to get through the process to the solution, and that's how I have felt about Hebrews 11 for quite some time. So it turns out, at least for me in this case, that this problem is basically aided by the chapter divisions. I think I told you 11:2 and 11:39 both kind of say the same things about the testimony or the witnesses that we're speaking about here. So as simple as an instruction as that was for me, I just couldn't turn the page to chapter 12 because I couldn't get my head around chapter 11, not thinking that maybe that's where the solution would be. So that said, I mentioned just now again 11:2 and 39, open and closing with the same thought. And, they got this good report, this good testimony. And that's a worthy goal for them. I told you that's what I want. I mean, I want God to say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. I want that kind of testimony for my effort here in this world. So when we look at Hebrews 12 and verse 1, which was part of the scripture reading here tonight, you'll notice that we are compassed about by this great cloud of witnesses. Remember what we said from chapter 10? And 2 or 3 witnesses under Moses' law, was cause for death. I told you I counted some 18 individuals in chapter 11, 16 prophets, a whole bunch of witnesses there, this great cloud of witnesses. That's why he supplied all that, to help the Hebrews understand, what other God-fearing people did in order to be acceptable to God. So it's a lot of people. That is more than 10 times the threshold for sufficient testimony. It's a lot of witnesses. And I think he's doing that to create the stronger argument, to convict them, to convince them that, it's a worthy cause, staying dedicated to Christ and Christianity. So this is where the answer actually starts in this verse, 12:1. Because of that whole great cloud of witnesses, the roadblock that I couldn't see past, we have some instruction here. Let us also lay aside every weight. That could be one of 100 or 1,000 different things. And let us lay aside, right, the sin which ensnares us or entangles us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. I don't have Noah's race. I don't have Abraham's race. I don't have those things in my life. But what I do have in my life, I will do better at it if I lay aside what slows me down and the sin that tangles me up and trips me up. I can run with endurance this race that is set before me. So that's how I figure these characters of Hebrew 11, how they apply to us. Because he comes directly out of that and he says, so just like them, right? Just like them, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that entangles us, and then run with patience the race that is set before us. So that's how I see the general application. I still haven't really gotten to my specific answer yet, but generally speaking, I thought, yeah, this is the way that it comes out. So after we've done that, after we put the weights down, we take the baggage off, after we get rid of those thorny vines right in the ground that are around our feet that are keeping us from running this race, guess what's next? Look at Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of God. So we have a little bit of a list right there. What did Jesus do? One thing, he endured the cross. Well, I'm not going to build an ark. I'm not going to leave my country. I certainly don't have any foresight that I'm going to be crucified. So this is not literal. But if you remember in the epistles, specifically, I like the one in Luke 9 the most. But if any man come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. So I'm supposed to run my race, not Moses' race, not Abraham's race, not Noah's race, my race. And I'm not going to carry Jesus' cross, or I certainly hope not, that would be something that would happen to me or to you. But whatever burden or that cross may be, we are called to carry that. So we have to endure our cross. What else did Jesus do? He endured sinners. You know any sinners? There any people that try to get in your way and obstruct you from doing what you know is the right thing to do? Remember, the admonition given to the Hebrews there is they hadn't even bled yet striving against sin. I haven't either. Now, some of y'all might have taken a fist to the nose for something that you believed in, and you could literally could have resisted unto blood because you have been persecuted in a physical sense. But I know that I haven't reached that level yet, right? So there's that. And then the next thing, he endured the discipline. That's chapter 12 there, verses 5 through 11. But I remember more specifically going back earlier in Hebrews, right, that he learned obedience through the things which he suffered, right? And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him. That would be me. That would be you. And so the point is, you can't just give up when the trouble comes. So now these guys are experiencing a little inconvenience, a mild persecution, and they're shrinking back. They're drawing back. So he gives them the admonition, lift your hands, strengthen your knees, make straight paths for yourself. Get up and dust yourself off and keep going because the cause is a worthy cause. So we're getting a list here, sort of, right? Set all this other stuff aside. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Why? He's the author and the finisher. Do you want to make it to the finish line? He's the finisher. He set the example. He paved the path. Keep your eyes on him, and then you won't be seeing all this other peripheral stuff that'll delay you or ensnare you or draw you back. Remember when Nehemiah went down to build the wall? Sanballat and Tobiah, where they said, hey, come down here and have tea and cake with us. We want to talk to you about what you're doing up there. He did not take his eyes off the goal to come down there and be distracted by them. All right. Another thing that we're called to do, 12:14, strive for peace and holiness. And we get a lot of admonition about this in other places in the New Testament, but this is one of the things. Set the stuff aside, focus on Jesus, strive for peace and holiness, right? We also have a responsibility. See that no one else fails or that any root of bitterness springs up anywhere. The next one, I want to modify my line here a little bit. This is not really the one about sexual immorality because that's a separate one. The point here is about Esau. And if you remember, he sold his birthright. What it's really trying to talk about is Esau selling himself. It is literally the word. It's like whoredom, literally the word is. And so the idea is he sold himself. He sold his birthright. And it was ridiculous, right, to sell such a valuable thing for so little. And I would suggest to you that this concept of birthright, he's talking to these Hebrews that have become Christians and they were born again and they're New Testament Christians. And in that sense, we have a spiritual birthright. What is our inheritance? Eternal life. And so he's saying, don't sell that off for just a little thing. And going back to your Judaism. And a sermon by itself, this next point. He draws a really nice illustration between Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. For right now, I just want to tell you, just like we've said about everything else in the book thus far, Mount Zion is a better mountain. It's a much better mountain. And you get that in the description that's in the text, but it is a better mountain than Sinai. You have dread and fear and terror versus the city of God and angels and the church and the spirits. It's a much prettier picture. And again, we're reminded, and you see my asterisk again, refuse not him that speaks. The whole time the point was Moses got the message from the mountain and Moses spoke to them, and under the Mosaical law, if they rejected him, they were put to death, right? But you refuse not him that speaks from heaven. Well, who is that? Goes back to chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 2. Hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son. And so he continues. He says he's shaken things up before. And once more he says, I'm going to shake everything. His kingdom will be all that remains. You ever taken a carpet outside and shook it or even beat it? Your hopes are you get everything else out of it so that when you're done, all you have left is carpet. And that's the idea, that when he's done, when he comes back for the kingdom and he delivers it up to the Father, that's all there's going to be, right? There's going to be the kingdom. And so he says, having that in mind, you have grace whereby you can serve God. So that's another component of what we're supposed to do. And I actually numbered these. I should have probably told you all that. Having grace is the 13th thing that I counted in this context that we are called to do, but there are many more. So remember, that was my question. What's God want me to do? I know what he wanted Noah to do and Moses to do. What's he want me to do? That's number 13, have grace. And we're almost there, right? Chapter 13. And it's brief because it really is stated briefly in the text, but the continuance of brotherly love. And we've talked a lot, there's been a lot of sermons here this year on the concept of brotherly love and loving one another and all of these sorts of things and the variety of ways that manifests itself. But that is one of the things that I'm called to do, that you're called to do. Entertain strangers, and I put that asterisk there, and I told you all this morning that means something. That means I connected it back to something in the direct context. A lot of times people will think, well, maybe that was Lot or Abraham when the angels came down to him. But do you know actually there's another one in this context? Does anybody know who Manoah is? Manoah's the father of one of the judges who was Samson. And the angel came down, and they didn't know it was an angel. They were offering him something, to eat. Can we make you some dinner, And they wanted to know his name. He's like, well, why are you asking my name? That's kind of a secret. And they thought, well, that's bizarre, but okay. And so they went on with it, and wouldn't you know, they burnt this offering, and he rode up on the flames. So just in context of the people that were talked about in chapter 11, entertain strangers because some in so doing have entertained angels unaware. Remember those that are in bonds. You look down to the end of this book, the author's talking about being in bonds and being set at liberty. And when he says also in the body, I don't think it means just general people in prison somewhere. I think he's specifically talking about brethren that are suffering that kind of persecution. Nevertheless, they are to be remembered. The sexual sin is there in verse 4. The contrast of covetousness and contentment is in verse 5, right? Be content with such things as you have, for he said, I'll never leave you or forsake you. Don't fear man. That one comes out of our Hebrews chapter 11. Who was it that didn't fear what the king would do to them? Moses' parents. So we've got here Samson's parents and Moses' parents that kind of make it out to this point where we have their example that we can emulate. Follow the faith of your leaders and your teachers. Now, there's been a lot of elder talk and elder teaching going on in the last few months. That's one of the things that falls into that category. Another thing that we're called to do, I have this down as number 21 on my list, is reject the strange teachings. He's specifically talking about meats in this context, but there are other strange teachings, I'm sure. And then I've actually run into an additional question, so this is a bonus question, and I want you to study this one out maybe and come back to me with it in the future. But if you'll notice, he talks here, the Old Testament sin offering was outside the camp there in verse 12. And it says, likewise, Jesus also suffered outside the gate. And the next verse really got me. Because this is what he is telling those New Testament Christians that just came out of Judaism to do. Let us go outside the camp to him, bearing his reproach. And I thought, is this limited application? Is this simply telling the Jews to get outside their Judaism and go out into the world kind of a thing? And I thought, obviously it's at least that. But the question is there extended application that can come to us? Because, should the Jews be the only ones that bear his reproach, or should not every one of his children? Why would more be asked of them than there would be of us? Do we not seek the same city that they were seeking? And so I thought there's pretty large implications here, because we talk a lot of times about, need to get outside my comfort zone. Well, they were probably a little more comfy in their Jewish culture, and again, that persecution not being there and everything. So I can see how that fits them. But when I was drawing application for myself, I thought to get up and get outside of myself or my norm or my life, that's scary business, and that's challenging. I've met some highly extroverted people that seems like they can talk to anybody about anything on a moment's notice, but that's not most of us. So there's pretty large implications in that. And I would ask you to do that. Study that out and see what you come out with from that. But I think that reaches to everybody. I think we're all supposed to kind of get outside of ourselves and our norm, especially if it means serving God with fullness. We talked this morning also about the fact that we are a royal priesthood, that Jesus was a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Thing number 23 on my list is, it says to offer the sacrifice of praise, of thanks. Well, who offers the sacrifices? The priests do. As a priest in the new covenant, I'm to offer the sacrifice of praise. And what he means here is thanksgiving. This is a really, really big deal to God. And the way that it's viewed, the way that it's illustrated, is as it's a sacrifice. The next verse, do good. James talks about that, right? And it's in Galatians 6 also. As we have opportunity, do good to all men. This is a common Christian teaching universally. But to do good and to share, but he also calls this a sacrifice. Probably because you're giving something of yourself or something of your substance to others. But this is a kind of sacrifice as a priest in the new covenant that we would offer up. And again, we have this obedience and submission to our leaders. And the final admonition that I counted, number 26, could have missed some, could have numbered them differently. Not looking for a list, I was just impressed. The number of people that were given as illustrations and the number of commands, as it were, that I got out of it. But praying for others is one of them, because again, he was seeking to be set at liberty. So it turns out that's what I found. I'm really good. Paul wrote so much of the New Testament that, I always called Romans the epistle sandwich, because you could just tell all the rest of them were just stuffed in there in layers, like it was just one sandwich with all the other epistles in there. But what I found in Hebrews was like a different kind of encapsulation of the gospel, tailored to the Jewish converts who, due to a little difficulty along the way, were starting to abandon the faith. So they were reminded, they were admonished, and they were encouraged to remain faithful to Christ. So the stakes are high, the punishment is severe, but the reward is great. So I thought, well, of everything that we looked at today, it ought to give us kind of a dependable barometer to look at to evaluate our own individual faith. I am certainly not doing anything as profound as those people that were listed in Hebrews chapter 11. But I can look at chapter 12 and chapter 13 and say, well, you know, am I really doing good to others? Am I entertaining the strangers? And I confessed this morning that I couldn't even tell you the names of my neighbors, so I'm probably not doing too awful much with the strangers either. So you can see that Jesse has a lot of work to do with his newly discovered free time. And so I want to get busy doing the thing that I feel like I am made to do, set to do, apt to do in that sense, because, you know, we're all clay pots of some kind and we have our different purposes. So I told you earlier, I'm late to this game and I need to be figuring it out. But I want to be about these kinds of things because I would like to strive to have this kind of faith that pleases God. So I really only have one thing left. It's something that I want to read to you. That's not very long, but I tried to get this picture, this contrast again, about Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. And among my collection of Bibles, I have one that is put out by Messianic Jews. They're Christians who came out of Judaism. The book of Hebrews was written to Christians that came out of Judaism. So where I don't have any, the denominational bias is not there, the Protestant Reformation is not involved in there, there's no Catholicism fingerprints on there. It is a completely distinct and different translation. And it has been very helpful to me, especially when I study Hebrew or Old Testament concepts. And it is the only English version I have seen where it does not have the word baptize, it has the word immerse. It does not have the word angel, it has the word messenger. So in that sense, it's really purer than a lot of the other ones that I have read. So I'm going to read to you a few verses here. And I really don't want you to read along, but because I want you to see the beauty of the language here. He says, "For you have not drawn near to a mountain touched and scorched with fire, and to blackness and darkness and storm, and a sound of a trumpet and a voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that no further word should be spoken to them. For they could not bear what was commanded. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot through with an arrow. And so fearsome was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and tremble. No, but you have drawn near to Mount Zion, and to the messengers or the angels, and to the entire gathering of the assembly of the firstborn, having been enrolled in heaven, and to Elohim, the judge of all, and to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, and to Yeshua, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of the sprinkling, which speaks better things than the blood of Abel." It's a very, very beautiful picture and a very stark contrast. And what they're saying is they want to leave this. The entire gathering and assembly of the firstborn having been enrolled in heaven, they want to leave that and go back to the other, to the mountain that people were scared to even look at, scared to listen to, and certainly wouldn't touch because they would be put to death. It's a totally different mountain. This is an inviting mountain. This is a place you would want to go. I often kind of giggle about the people that love to go to Hawaii because it's a volcano. And, you know, there's danger involved in that, right? I mean, you can read history. There's some risk involved in that. That's not a mountain that I would want to go to. But there are mountains that I do like to go to, on the eastern border of Tennessee, for example. So this is a better mountain. It's a beautiful mountain. It's a beautiful resting place. It's a beautiful ending. And he's really trying to remind them of that picture. So the question is, have you drawn near to Zion? That's really the question. A beautiful picture, a much more pleasant alternative. And you are invited. He wants you to draw near to Mount Zion. Not to Mount Sinai or some other mountain of our choice in the world, but to Mount Zion. And it looks like there's going to be a lot of awesome and amazing people there. We read about a lot of them today, and I would assume that I'm in the presence of many more that will be there also. But if you're not in that group, if you're not in that gathering, that assembly of the firstborn, you have that opportunity tonight to be born again, to get a birthright that should never be sold like someone like Esau. But if you have a need tonight and you would like to have that handled, to be right with God, to get on the right path, to get behind me and push me along with all this newfound free time that I can be about the Father's work, we would encourage you to do so while we stand, while we sing.